As a result of you guys slamming the like button, I'm forced to respond one more time to the most recent death battle between Kyle and Simone, and I decided to tackle the most commonly used meta in defense of Simone and Gurren Lagann, Simone's adaptation and evolutionary hacks. Simone's ability to evolve and adapt has been shown to entirely transcend the dimensions from the verse that he is in, and that's an incredibly powerful hack inside of really like any verse that exists. He canonically even uses it in verse to transcend to those higher spatial dimensions, so who's to say he can't do so once more? Who's to say that he can't do so an infinite amount of times upwards and beyond? Well, let me introduce you to what often guns down these arguments, and unfortunately, we do have to resort to some scaling terminology here. This is what we call a no-limits fallacy. But what exactly is a no-limits fallacy, and why does it eliminate any chance of victory for Simone against Kyle and even DC's cosmology? Let's find out. What's up, guys? It's me, Lumos Theromax, and it's been a while since I've done an intro like this, so I don't know if you guys are liking it with or without the intros, but either way, be sure to like and subscribe, consider becoming a member, and hope you guys are enjoying the Theromax channel. With that being said, let's get back to it. So, that being said, let's bring things back to Simone's adaptive and evolutionary hacks, being capable of overcoming concepts greater than they've demonstrated so far. And what exactly a no-limits fallacy is considered. And what do you know, I have a definition cooking right here for us. So, a no-limits fallacy is considered when somebody states that because something has not demonstrated any limits or only certain limits, then it just doesn't have any. It just doesn't have any limits whatsoever. And it's a really important thing whenever it comes to the way I scale and the way I do versus matchups in general, to understand that I like to hold characters to account to what exactly they can prove that they can do versus what you believe that they can do via logical chains of rationality. After all, convincing somebody that they could do something based on blank doesn't really get very far when they've never canonically done so, right? For example, the go-to primary example that always comes out of Naruto, okay? Yo, Itachi says that no one can defeat a Mangekyo Sharingan unless you have one. So, logically, that means no other verse that exists out there can beat Itachi, because no one else has Mangekyo Sharingan, right? It's the same kind of argument that a lot of people employ in a variety of different places, and unfortunately adaptive hacks are often used in this no-limit fallacy argument pretty consistently. But whenever I look at these things, one of the first things I like to employ is whenever I'm discussing a topic or anything along those lines, and especially fallacious arguments, is, well, if that's the case, would I like to apply that to the opposite side? And would they actually withstand anything if I chose to apply that same rule, that no limits fallacy, to both sides? And let's see if we can do that here. Everyone has heard the classic, the Green Lantern ring is the strongest weapon in the universe, the most dangerous weapon in the universe, the most powerful weapon in the universe. Well, keep in mind, there's a lot of weapons inside of DC, and that includes the Miracle Machine. The Miracle Machine was capable of firing and altering all of DC cosmology simultaneously. So do we just say average Green Lantern rings are stronger than the Miracle Machine? Because every Green Lantern ring has that statement, let alone Kyle's. So no limits fallacies can get pretty ridiculous if you start considering them, especially in verse. And trust me, Gurren Lagann fans, you really don't want to do no limits fallacies with Kyle Rayner, because he's one of the easiest characters to do it. And if the best that we really have for Gurren Lagann fans is, well, it can transcend to any level because he's demonstrated doing so in the past. Well, why can't we use that same argument for Kyle Rayner? Kyle Rayner transcended all of DC cosmology in but just a few panels, and did it multiple times, more times than we've seen the Gurren Lagann crew do so. So, like, if I was to apply those same rules to DC, I could make that exact same argument for Kyle. The only difference is the dimensions within the concepts of space and time are just larger and more qualitative and more valuable inside of DC than they are inside of Gurren Lagann. Why? Well, because our cosmology is actually in-depth and filled and full of conceptual things past just 12 dimensions, or even if you want to take the definitely faked translations of 20 dimensions, Like, that's also an L in that situation. But even if you take the outer versal arguments, which I don't buy, but even if you do, hypothetically, that would just place him at best in the bleed or even in the God Sphere, and being in the God Sphere doesn't scale you to top tier characters within DC, as shown in the Godhead arc, where Highfather was looking for a power equatable of just fighting other figures in the God Sphere, and he thought Kyle in the Life Equation was the perfect opportunity to do it, simply because it scaled beyond anything that he could possibly demonstrate. Once again, showing that it's at least beyond anyone inside, in base, anyone beyond, like the God Sphere, which is your, like, low outer to 1S scaling, because, like, certain realms inside the God Sphere, like the Dreaming, for example, have an infinite series of narrative transcendences within them, just like Heaven does, and as a result, Hell does as well, too. So, like, that doesn't even get you out of the God Sphere, so that's kind of unfortunate for him. So, utilizing statements for one side only is kind of silly, because if you're fair to it whatsoever, you can apply it to both sides. So let's not get too crazy. And if you think I'm being unfair or I'm being unreasonable in that department, let's talk about my past, okay? So, unironically, whenever it comes to adaptive hacks, I've actually argued against stuff like this for a long time, okay? And I mean a long time. And unironically, believe it or not, people, I was actually arguing against it in DC, against people who use this idea with characters in DC and try to take it to the most extreme place imaginable, okay? Let's take, for example, the person that everybody knows whenever it comes to DC. Even normies are aware of this guy simply because of how popular he was. Let's talk about the wonderful adaptive hacks of Golden Amazo from the Justice League animated universe. Look, this dude's adaptive hacks were crazy. And there were people who watched the show and just said, yeah, he could one-shot everyone in the comics because he would just look at them and adapt instantaneously and one-tap them. Okay, well, until his comics came out later on and he got, like, creation tier scaling, don't question it, that was all just a bunch of hype, okay? That was just people saying, well, my character can adapt, so he's better than anybody, okay? That's kind of weeb and lame, okay? But let's talk an even more frustrating the concept that every comic book character, or every comic book fan in the multiverse, whenever it comes to DC, loves to jerk off into the ground, okay? There's only one thing that DC fans like more than adaptive hacks, and that's Cosmic Armor Superman, because he has them as well. In my prior reviews of Cosmic Armor Superman, people were big boy frustrated that I didn't grant Superman greater than any fiction that ever was status, simply because he can adapt and become stronger instantaneously against any foe that he fights. But that doesn't mean that he can just bridge the gap between where he's at and anyone on any tier past him. Even random heroes and villains have better scaling than Cosmic Armor Superman in the modern day, and that gap is just way too large for someone like even Cass to cover it, where he demonstrated back then. And that's the important thing. If a character is an entire tier or more above, like, another character, especially with really powerful hacks such as reality warping on the scale of the Source or the Life Equation that Kyle wields here, that's just one-shot potential, even by the standards that Deathbattle gave. Not to mention that, in reality, DC has infinitely more layers to itself than Gurren Lagann, as well as conceptual layers past that. Adaptation and evolutionary hacks also unfortunately take time, and Kyle does not suffer from this with his power set. Not to mention, he'd be the entire conceptual layers removed from Simone, even understanding what Kyle is, let alone where Kyle is, if he had gone through the source wall or created a source wall in the first place. If I'm being consistent whenever it comes to applying no limits fallacies, I feel like both sides should be playing by those same rules. And I wish other people would apply this more to their own verses whenever they come to trying to use these logical assertions to pinwheel like a larger scaling chains together. At the end of the day, I feel like this battle and this conversation comes down to this analogy. You really like a boxer because they proved they could swing one weight class and professional tier above their own. However, I walk up and say that that's cool, but I think Anderson Silva, one of the like more notorious mixed martial artists in his day, in his prime, would fold him, and asks why you think Simone here would win. And your argument is because he defeated somebody in one weight class above his, so he can defeat anyone in above his weight class or skill class because he already proved he could do so and adapt to other weight classes in the prior fight. In my opinion, you can only hold people accountable to what you can provably demonstrate them being capable of doing, and Kyle has provably demonstrated vastly superior data to anything that we've seen inside of Gurren Lagann. Even in Death Battle's own interpretation of DC's dimensions, it doesn't make sense, because if they were trying to use them, this scan only references dimensions below the source wall. And then you have the source wall as its own realm, and then you have the 6th dimension beyond that, and then the overvoid, which is where the source is demonstrated on the map, which is the exact same point in time all of these events were happening. Even if you just counted them all as dimensions, that would just be an additional 3 tiers above where Death Battle placed it. And we could be here all day trying to repair the lackluster DC interpretations that Death Battle had here. But the most important takeaway is that not all scaling terms are bad, and some are very important to use. And today's special word is no limits fallacy for the Gurren Lagann fans. But to be honest, there's always going to be haters out there, or even worse, total Death Battle simp fanboys like this dude, who don't really pay attention to anything other than the verdict. But that's not someone who I am. Somebody who blindly accepts somebody else's position because someone they like said so. That's not really how I function. I'm a data-driven person, and the data that was driven inside this video was tragic. But there's not really much you can do beyond that. If you decide to be a Death Battle fanboy, that's the biggest L of them all. And you know what? If y'all think I just rep DC, anytime DC had a Death Battle come up, it's not true, boys. Y'all can listen to a ton of people in my server from back in the day being triggered about how Hulk lost to Doomsday. Okay? Because believe it or not, I read a lot of Marvel. Or I did. I read a ton of Marvel back in the day, okay? Everything up to 2015 is stuff that I've got pretty well sitting here in the noggin, okay? So when I see something that's not accurate, I call out things for being inaccurate, as anybody should do. And if you're out here repping that Death Battle thinking they scaled DC honestly, that's more of a comment about where you're at in life whenever it comes to scaling comics than anything I could post below it. So, all the haters out there, keep hating. It only makes me more popular, and it only brings more people to the truth. The truth of just how dangerously powerful some of these big verses are like DC in comparison to younger anime verses, despite how hard they try. Not that some of them don't exist. And to be 100% honest, guys, I like Gurren Lagann. I don't really have any issues with Gurren Lagann. You just sent a toddler into the professional mixed martial arts tournament expecting a win for some reason, because this toddler at one point in time hurt an adult. That don't mean they need to be in the room fighting other adults, okay? Like, crazy takes from the Gurren Lagann fan base. But be sure to let me know what you guys think down low. I tried to keep this one short, but clearly I could not keep it past anything of what I have here, so I do apologize. Keep your eyes up, and the absurd power of the Miracle Machine will be the next video that you guys actually voted for. I've already begun compiling a massive video together, so I hope you guys are dead set ready to go on that action, and we'll catch you next time, Lanterns. Later.